There wasn't always a set of ethics to follow when performing experiments, and some researchers in the past even used people against their will or without telling them about it first. In 1974, the government put a rule in place saying that any test subject had to be informed of the full experiment and provide consent. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at 3 experiments performed which never should have happened. Maria de Manesine sleep deprivation in dogs. Maria de Manesine was one of the first women to study medicine and graduate in Russia. In fact, she may have been one of the first in all of Europe. The work she did in neuroscience has been influential in studies on sleep deprivation. Maria travelled all over Europe to share her studies, and she wrote several articles and books in 4 different languages. Maria went to St. Petersburg to work with a professor named Ivan Romanovich Tarkhanov, who had an interest in studying sleep problems. Maria began studying the effects sleep deprivation had on puppies in 1894. Maria performed her research using 10 puppies, which were all between 2 and 4 months old. The puppies were fed by their mother and were fully taken care of, but Maria made sure they were active all the time so they couldn't go to sleep. They were forced to walk around, or they always had someone handling them. All of the puppies died within 4 to 5 days. This was especially interesting because dogs can survive without food for up to 25 days and still be rescued after finally eating food after all that time. Maria's research showed that puppies' body temperatures and their red blood cell count both decreased the longer they were awake. The puppies' activity slowed down and they became weaker day by day. Most of the damage occurred in the puppies' brains. Many brain hemorrhages were found, and some of the blood vessels in their brains were impaired. She also found that the youngest puppies died first. Maria concluded that sleep is one of the most critical components of survival, even more so than food. Her study disproved the previous theory that sleep was a useless and unpleasant pastime. Maria's work with these puppies offered significant benefits to future sleep research and inspired experiments performed in the coming years. Researchers performed a similar experiment in 1896, but they experimented on humans instead. This was the first sleep deprivation study performed on humans. 2 years later, researchers performed the same experiment Maria performed on dogs, but they also performed a more detailed analysis of the dogs' brains. The monster study. In the 1930s, the predominant theory about stuttering was that it was probably genetic, people who stuttered were born that way, and no one could do anything about it. A speech pathologist named Wendell Johnson, who was a stutterer himself, didn't believe this theory to be true. His speech had always been fine until the teacher mentioned that he was developing a stutter when he was 5 or 6. He became obsessed with his speech after that. He grew more self-conscious about talking, and did in fact develop a stutter. In his own opinion, this was a learned behaviour that only occurred because of how fixated he was on it. While working as a professor at the University of Iowa in 1939, Dr. Johnson wanted to find a way to disprove the theory that stuttering was genetic. He believed that labelling children as stutterers made their stuttering worse, and that this label could even cause other children to start stuttering, even if they had never done so before. The experiment he performed to prove his beliefs is known as the monster study. Dr. Johnson recruited 22 orphans for his experiment. 10 were already labelled stutterers. These 10 were divided into a normal speakers group and a stutterers group. The 12 who didn't already have a stuttering problem were divided equally into these 2 groups as well. The normal speakers received plenty positive encouragement throughout the study, whilst the stutterers were made to feel self-conscious about their stuttering. They were often lectured about not repeating words and were told they shouldn't speak unless they were sure they could do it correctly. The stutterer label was reinforced at the orphanage when teachers and staff were told that everyone in the group were stutterers. 2 of the 6 children in the stutterer group who had never previously stuttered before began to do so after receiving so much negativity in lectures. For 3 of the children who had always had a stuttering problem, the problem grew worse. 2 of the children in the normal speakers group who had previously had a stuttering issue showed slight improvements. Only 1 of the children in the normal speakers group developed speech problems throughout the study. Interestingly, the non-stuttering children in the stutterer group began to behave like those who did already stutter. They acted embarrassed and became less talkative. They often whispered and they gulped more when talking. Some even held their mouths closed to stop themselves from talking. Even though they never stuttered, they acted as if they did. The researchers performing this experiment then tried to reverse the damage they had caused these children, but they weren't successful. Labelling the children one way or another seemed to affect them permanently. The children with the stutterer label weren't ever able to rid themselves of this negative label. Supporters of the experiment have pointed out that Dr. Johnson and his team did have good intentions. They just wanted to help people who stuttered. Their findings also help researchers find successful ways to treat people with stuttering problems. But despite their good intentions, their experiment lacked ethical standards. The children involved were never told they were a part of a study. Some of them only found out when a newspaper wrote a story about it years later. The true purpose of the experiment was never explained to the teachers and staff at the orphanage, and they felt as though they had been deceived. Because of the unethical practices, Dr. Johnson was advised not to publish the study because it would ruin his reputation. People compared it to the way the Nazis did experiments on humans during World War II. Some people have argued that this made it worse because the findings were never fully explained, meaning the damage inflicted was for nothing and the benefits of the study were reduced. In 2003, some of the test subjects filed a lawsuit against the University of Iowa because of the psychological problems caused by the test. These problems had never gone away. Experts agreed that there were not set ethical standards in 1939 and didn't believe the case would hold up all those years later. The university made a public apology, and in 2007, 7 of the subjects received a total of $1.2 million. Project 4.1. According to stories, a Navy worker held a meeting with the people living on Bikini Atoll in 1946. He told them that they had been chosen just like the Israelites in biblical days. He told them that they had to perfect the atom bomb because it would be a critical weapon in future wars. A month later, the people on the island were evacuated, and the first 2 tests were completed within 5 months. The United States tested over 60 nuclear weapons from 1946 to 1958 in the Marshall Islands. All these tests occurred either on or near the Bikini Atoll. One hydrogen bomb was 1,000 times as big as the Hiroshima bomb, and the flash from its detonation could be seen thousands of miles away. It vaporized islands, and some were covered in radioactive particles. People on nearby islands had been exposed for several days, and became subjects of the secret government project referred to as Project 4.1. They were evacuated to another island, which had been severely contaminated, to learn more about the effects of radiation exposure on human beings. The islanders had to endure this experiment for 30 years. Some women who became pregnant during this time delivered stillborn babies or had babies with birth defects. Legal battles arose between the government and the people from the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands was granted independence in 1996, and the government paid a cash settlement of $150 million. This settlement included trust funds for multiple atolls. The government also agreed to pay for environmental and food programs along with healthcare. Unfortunately for the people on the Marshall Islands, these grants expire in 2023. It was presumed by many people that this experiment was racially driven. At the time of the Atomic Energy Commission, it was said that the United States government experiment felt the experiment provided a unique opportunity to study a group of people who were uncivilized but more similar to them than mice. The islanders were considered savages. They had their own unique culture that this experiment took away from them. So what do you make of these experiments? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and help us by growing this community, whilst working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.